To get yourself started handling a fly rod, there's only one handle here, so it's really easy to know what to do. Either with your left hand if you're left-handed, or right-handed if you're right-handed like me. You're going to grip the rod. The important thing is what you do with your thumb, because if you grip the rod with your thumb wrapped around the rod, the problem is that rod can really pivot in your hand and you get very little control over what the rod's doing. But if you get your thumb either on top of the rod or off to the side of the rod, just pointing along the cork grip there, you get a really good strong control of the rod, and the rod's just going to follow whatever your wrist and forearm do, and that's going to give you all the control you want. So to get started, to make the cast, you really need to use your whole arm. So that means using your wrist, your forearm and your upper arm. So to start with, what I tend to do is start with the wrist down, and so the butt of the rod is just along our forearm, and then I come back with my forearm and my upper arm. So I lift up, forearm and upper arm, and when the reel and the butt of the rod are nice and close in front of me, at the end I knock over the wrist. So the wrist snaps, my thumb is pointing straight up, the rod's off to the back on an angle around about the 1 o'clock position, and from there I'm in my back cast position, so the line's going to be traveling backwards, and from there now I travel forwards into the forward cast, and what I do is I do the opposite with the wrist. So instead of the wrist knocking over straight away, I hold the wrist back, I drive again with the forearm and dropping the elbow, drive again and knock the wrist over at the end. So at both casts, the wrist's at the end. So going forward, the wrist snaps at the end, going back, the wrist snaps at the end of the cast. So I'll show you again. Coming back with the forearm, snap the wrist, coming forward with the forearm, snap the wrist. That way we're going to get a really good control of the tip of the rod. Also, what's really important, you notice, is I make sure I really stop the stroke at the end, and by causing that stop, what's happening is we've got our bent rod, and the bent rod stops and it straightens and throws a line, and if we can really stop the rod nice and abruptly, we'll get that line to accelerate off. To learn how to control your rod really well, it's really important to learn how to control your wrist, because remember how I told you the upper arm, the forearm and the wrist should all work in quite a balanced fashion. If we use too much wrist, then we're going to get our rod tip traveling in all different directions. So remembering how we stopped high at the top, thumbs pointing up, the rod's on an angle facing backwards, and there's a gap here between the rod butt and the forearm of around about 25 degrees. If we drop our wrist back too far and that gap now turns into a 90-degree gap, we're going to find that our rod tip's going to be all the way back on the grass, we're going to be losing a lot of flies, and we're going to really lose control of our cast.